educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century. How do we do that, given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week? Every country on Earth is trying to figure out how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle?
You call that radio?
Makes coherent sense.
It you call that politics. Not you call that radio, it you call that politics. And we've got Jim. Well, that was quite good, wasn't it? It's you call that politics. We had a show last week, and it was this episode 2. Last week it was about drugs. It was a great chat with Jim Monaghan and Susan McCabe. And then there was a panel discussion about the decriminalisation of drugs, and it was great to hear a political debate that had no mentions of parties, apart from at the end. There was a wee plug at the end, but apart from that, this is to talk about ideas, not about party politics. I have no affiliation with party politics and no interest in party politics as such, but what we talk about is ideas. What's going wrong today, the education system? What's going wrong? Is there anything wrong? How do we fix it? Let's get Jim first of all. Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Mark. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Good.
I'm looking forward to this one tonight.
I am too.
There's still a delay.
There's a bit of a delay. But I think we'll be okay. I think it's going to be fine. I'm going to because we started a bit late tonight. We're just going to we'll forget about the introductions and we'll just go right into it.
I've got a little thing that we have to do at the start for our audience participation. Last week we had asked you to come up with band names that were linked to parliamentary constituencies during the election. This one you have a serious task. After the independence, after we get independence, we're going to be dumping the monarchy, obviously. And so what we need to know is who's going to be the president of Scotland. And of course, you have to bear in mind that we want a good president. So for instance, the Czech Republic had the playwright, Václav Havel. The Ukraine had a comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky. Ronald Reagan, the Hollywood actor, was the president of the USA. And of course, in Britain, we have Boris Johnson, who is a sitcom character created by Ricky Gervais. And so who would be the president of your independent Scotland? That's what we want to hear from you tonight as the show goes on.
And obviously, it's worth pointing out that we're now, I think, in our 24th day of mourning for Prince Philip. I hope you're holding up okay, Jim.
Yeah, well, I had a 21 salute earlier. Help me a little bit, help me cope.
I see that Prince Andrew was saying that we're all in the same boat. Obviously, some of those boats, some people go to food banks, and some people get a £180 million royal yacht.
Yeah, and some people are in dinghies. It's a different kind of boat he's in. But I did have some kind of... It was quite heartening to see that. But there are things that link us to the royal family, because I also didn't get to wear an admiral's uniform at my dad's funeral either. I wasn't allowed either, but there you go.
Cut from the same cloth, it seems.
Yeah. Just like us.
Some people get the £190 million royal yacht from the Tories, and some people get dinghied by the Tories. So we are in the same boat of sorts. Let's introduce our guests here tonight. We've got Laura. First of all, Laura, thanks for joining us. If you could just give us a quick introduction.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. So first of all, I'm a student at the University of Glasgow, and I'm a third year now. So I've been in the system for a bit now. And I'll just say I'm also part of Stand Up to Racism, which is an organization that tries to be fighting against racism, as the name says. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Becky Wallace, if you could just give us a little introduction.
Hi, well, you know me, but today I'm Becky Wallace, the But today, Matthew and Becky Wallace, the lecturer, a community artist and PhD researcher, so I research community education and links with mainstream education and the curriculum for excellence, and also work as a creative practitioner both in a higher education institution and out on the streets, on the main streets with lots of different folk. So that's me. Hello.
Amazing. Hello. And Hashim.
Hi everyone, I'm Hashim. I'm a primary school teacher in Glasgow. I've been doing that for the past 2 or 3 years. Maybe here's some reflections on that in this chat. And I've been focusing most of my activism recently around anti-racism. So yeah, hoping to chat a wee bit about that tonight.
Thank you very much, Hashim. And then what I'll be doing is just like, I'll be in the background in case you need a cup of tea or anything. Just give me a shout and I'll pass it over to Jim.
Becky Wallace ate all the crisps in the green room, you would have noticed when you got there. That tends to happen when she's around. But I'm glad to have you here. I'm really looking forward to the panel tonight, and because I think we've got quite a good range. We talk about education quite often. I know. Is there still a delay then? Because I mentioned the crisps quite a while ago.
There's a wee one.
And I maybe start the debate on racism. Laura mentioned. Okay, that seems like quite a big one to me. Anyway, we'll carry on. We'll maybe start the debate on anti-racism. It's a good place to start when we're talking about education. Laura mentioned she's an activist who stand up to racism. I know Hashim's done a lot of work on racism in the education system and all that. I was speaking to a friend of mine who is a primary school in Glasgow, and where predominantly kids of colour, predominantly Asian kids, and she was saying even her children at primary school age notice how white the library is. So they even at a very, very, very early age, it's noticeable. So I was going to maybe start with Hashim and some of the stuff you'd been doing with the website with and things like that. And over the last year, probably since the rise of Black Lives Matter, we've had this constant talk about stat use, which has then moved into education, about whether we should be teaching in the curriculum the history of the empire, the history of colonialism. Do you see that would be an advantage, A, for our education system? Would it be good for the kids in the schools? And would it be good in general for society if we had this embedded in the curriculum?
I think it's absolutely essential to take account of the involvement of Scotland and the UK and the British Empire, and also examining, first of all, the history of what has happened over the past 500 years, and also the legacies from that time that exist up until today. So you can see over the past year, people have been chatting about it a lot, and it's the first thing people have focused on, which I think is really important to think about our history and to, first of all, dispel the notion that Scotland doesn't have a problem with racism. It's got a huge problem. A lot of people have been talking about it for years and years, and you can see the powers that be are starting to talk about it now, which is positive. It's good. But I would say that a lot of the chat this year has been around issues to do with representation. So that's representation in terms of what you were saying, Jim, like books in the library, like books needing to reflect kids' life, which is great. Representation when it comes to teachers working in schools. So there's lots of stats going around about the teaching profession not being reflective of Scotland as a whole in terms of non-white teachers. There's only one BME teacher in the whole of Scotland, which is shocking. So that's another instance of representation being talked about. But I think that, and also there's also the manifesto pledge that the SNP came out with today about starting. I made a note of what they're actually doing. It is an online programme about Scotland and the UK's colonial history throughout the world that can be delivered in schools, with local authorities encouraged to deliver the programme in all schools. So I would say that's not an entirely encouraging statement, because it's not making any pledge to do anything. It's offering an option, which is, I think, not something that we need to do. There needs to be a commitment to it across the whole system. I would say representation is one part. It is, but anti-racists, lots of anti-racist scholars and activists over the years have talked about fighting racism not as a matter of just seeing more non-white people or hearing more about them. It doesn't, for me, get to the heart about how we're in this system that we are right now. So that's thinking about white supremacy. It's talking about how the kind of ideology of empire hasn't gone away. And one thing that a lot of these government pledges don't talk about, I feel, is about how education itself has been a part of the problem. Like for my generation, my mum's generation, and like before, education is part of maintaining that system of racism. And I'm saying that as a teacher. Obviously, I can't speak about specifics, but we can see from all the stats and any kind of anecdotal evidence that the system itself needs a radical shake-up. And talking about what's happened in the empire is good, but I think it's only just the start. Really, we need to have much more kind of a longer engagement with the subject to like see any substantial change.
I got caught off there, so I missed a little bit at the end, but right at the end, so good timing it coming back. I don't know what's happening here. I seem to be cutting on in and out the internet, which is unusual. On that point about representation, there was a speech by Nas Sarwar in the Parliament. I don't know how accurate this is or not, but he said that every single head teacher of every single school in Scotland is white, which I found just an astonishing, unbelievable statistic. Becky, I was wondering, in the university, further education university sector, is that as bad as it is, say, in primary schools? Or are there more people of colour or more BAME people working within that sector?
Representation in some ways is slightly stereotyped, although there are more people. But in terms of the hierarchical structure of it, I would say that still the same rules apply within higher education and further education, which is that the further up the food chain you go, the whiter it does become. Certainly throughout the many schools and different disciplines, there is a broader visual of representation, but you know the balance there isn't anywhere close to where it should be. And I mean, I was listening to Hashim talking, and there's so else in terms of exclusion of certain ways at the world and teaching that ring true. And what is saying, of course, being a white woman, we have different experiences of education, but at the same time, the idea of the restructure in order to inform young people of a broader, more integrated reality is certainly just as apparent in higher education as clearly as in primary. Jim, you're muted.
One of the things yeah, it's okay. Matt's unmuted me now. One of the things talking about racism in schools is sometimes how they deal with it. And I've had friends who are BAME or mixed race, and their kids at school have horrendous problems when there is an actual incident of racism, where the schools tend to rush to tick a box, make sure they've covered their own arses, and then are you allowed to say arses? Yes, arses, and then actually don't deal with it. Just are satisfied that they've dealt with it enough to not face any follow-up from it. I mean, I don't know if that's something that Laura, you would have went to school in Spain. Do you think is there a different attitude in Spain, or is this a kind of European colonial attitude that happens elsewhere as well?
I would say it is definitely an attitude that I've seen growing up so many times. I think, well, I haven't experienced it myself, but I know that schools are way more concerned about the image they're projecting than what the kids are going through. And I can say I've seen incidents where not only have the kids been silenced, but they've been told that it wasn't something to be complaining about. So I think, especially in Spain, and I've seen in the UK as well, there's this attitude that the worst is over and that racism is no longer a problem. And if someone, dares to speak up and complain about it, as they should, they're just trying to give the school bad press or any type of ulterior motive that is not just speaking the truth. So I would say that's definitely a European problem. And I think especially in Spain, it's made invisible, but that's conscious. I think people don't want to have these conversations because they remind us of that uncomfortable past we need to address. But that's not obviously the attitude to have.
Yeah, I mean, as obviously education, like any other sector in a society, reflects society, and it didn't surprise me living in Govan Hill that we had a report a couple of years back from the UN about anti-Roma racism showed that a third, I think 34% of parents in Scotland would be unhappy with their kid being taught by someone from a gypsy background, which I shouldn't have been surprised at, but the sheer numbers surprised me. And teaching in primary schools, Hashim, is that a thing that comes up a lot? Is the school where you are facing those kind of problems with the racism against the actual kids in the school?
I can't speak about my own school just because of can't speak about my own school, but I can speak in kind of general terms, perhaps.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is very true. Like, I think a lot of the conversation over the past few years has been around teachers not being able to spot what is racist or knowing how to log it or how to report it and how to respond to it in ways that don't brush it under the carpet, in a way that I think lets a lot of people off scot-free, because when something happens again and again and again for years and years and years, I just don't believe it's a matter of people being kind of innocent and not knowing what to do. There's some kind of vested interest in that, in the full extent of the problem not being shown. I think it would just be a bit too shocking if everyone knew exactly what happens in all the schools and every sector that we work in. It's a systemic problem, that it happens, and also things aren't being done to deal with it in the appropriate way.
Yeah. What can we do to change that and do it in the appropriate way? Is there anything? I always like to talk in this idea. We're talking about politics outside of the sort of election kind of things. We're not sort of knocking one party or suggesting one party didn't do it because they all didn't do it. But I was wondering if there is anything, Hashim, something, a basic, simple step that we could do right now that could be implemented that would change things.
It's a very big question. Sorry, my alarm seems to be going. There we go. I've got a few minutes on my fast breaks, but we're good. We have some time. It's a big question. I think the thing that I'm personally most interested in is thinking about how the knowledge that we present in schools has come from the colonial context, and how the kind of way that we teach doesn't reflect the way our country has come to be. So one of the things I've been thinking about, and from the reading that I've been doing, is about situating all this westernized knowledge, all the whitewashed knowledge that Becky's actually mentioned to us there, putting that in its proper context. So, for example, Edward Said, I'm sure you've all heard of him and a lot of the amazing work that he's done. A lot of the thing that he talks about is putting classic Western works in their proper context. So he did it with Mansfield Park, a Jane Austen novel. Quite a lot of the time, it's not been seen as something that has any connection to the Empire. But he makes an important point that that story is intimately linked to that history, and through the different plot lines and the characters and where they go and what they're responsible for. So what I would like to see is not, for example, swapping out what we do now with, say, stuff that comes from Africa or from Asia. We don't want to swap stuff. We want to teach everything at the same time, but we need to show that, oh, right, that does have a pretty dark past, or that we are connected in lots of different ways. Robert Burns, how can we talk about Robert Burns without chatting about his connections with slavery, for example? Or World War II, a very common topic taught in the latter stages of primary school. Yeah. How could we talk about that without talking about the British Empire at the same time? So that's what I would want to see. It's a big cultural shift to try and think in that way. I think it'd take a long time, but thinking in that joined up way between what we see as ourselves and other people is the most important thing to do for me, and something that I'd be personally interested in the most.
I think also if we are educating kids in a different way, then hopefully we don't get to the stage where a third of the parents wouldn't want a gypsy teacher, etc. So if kids are coming through school and not seeing racism as something that just was an embarrassment for the teacher that got hushed up and then it was okay and you can do it again tomorrow, if we can actually sort of embed that in the education all the way through, then hopefully we produce less racist adults. I mean, surely the point of education, and anyone can come in this, surely, I'll probably hash it because I know you have to go, surely the point of education is to create good adults at the end of it.
It is, but I would say that education is one part of the whole system, and to make any meaningful change, I think people have to own up to the fact that it's not just a matter of educating people better. It's the fact that there's like deep biases inbuilt within the whole of society that would not just be eradicated by people being educated in a different way. It has to be everything at once. Bit of a revolution, maybe. But thanks so much. I'm going to go and break my fast. It was a pleasure chatting to you all. Hope he's had a good chat.
Good. Well, you're back on again sometime, Hashim. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much, Hashim.
Cheers.
Amazing stuff. Some brilliant points, and I've actually got a substitute teacher, I suppose in a way.
Oh, a substitute teacher.
A substitute teacher, because obviously, so we've still got 3 on the panel. I don't know how long he can stay for, but I just thought I'd ask him if he was available, and he is. It's Dougie, aka Killer Whale, aka Dougie of the Mickey Nines, and
right,
And I'll just read out a couple of comments quickly. The first president, Grado. Someone's wanting Grado to be president, which is a good one.
It's yourself.
It's yourself. We've got Lou's in the house, Paul's in the house, Jim's son's in the house. The history of the Empire should be taught in schools, and Scotland's role in it should be taught as well. Very important, very important. I think it's incredible what we're taught and what the reality is. It's wild. Alan, exactly. Scots involvement in the cotton, sugar and tobacco trades was disproportionate to the country's size, and Scottish involvement in India should be a national embarrassment. HT Clare saying the commitment needs to be to create curricula that's truly culturally responsive, and the teacher needs to learn how to use culturally lenses to integrate all that goes on in class and community. Also, anti-racist education isn't just something to be taught in a lesson. It should be how all systems in a school are. We walk as anti-racist in all schools in Scotland. It is embedded. And Black Lives Matter protests last year highlighted a lot of things which were already known to a lot of people already. The whole debate around street names and cities and statues. And I seen a comedian earlier on talking about the fact that the phrase Black Lives Matter Not that no other lives matter, just that Black Lives Matter seems to be a topic still up to debate, and that says it all, really, doesn't it? And Danny's saying the outdoor education movement is growing in Scotland. Big ups to Danny and the Wheels of Fleet. I'll wait you. So thank you, Doogie, for joining us. Thanks you to Hashim for his comments earlier on, and I'll be backstage if you.
Cheers, Doogie. Thanks a lot for stepping in. I wondered if you'd be listening in there, if you'd anything to add to just what we've been saying there before we move on to another subject, if you'd wanted to add anything to that, or
I only caught the last sort of 5 minutes. I just got the tail end of it. Obviously, got the general gist of what was being said, and obviously, I kind of generally agreed with the kind of the gist of the conversation and pretty much with everything that Hashim was saying. The only one thing I would say that not to try to be controversial at all, because as I say, I'm obviously in accordance with the general vibe of the conversation, but the British, I'm not a history teacher, I'm an English teacher. As far as I understand it, compared to when I was in school, the history of the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, elements of the British Empire and the civil rights movement in America are already mainstays of the history curriculum.
Good.
So the thing is, I'm not a history teacher, so I'm not sure exactly what the percentages are, but certainly it's this idea that it's completely not taught or it just needs to be refocused onto this. It really is taught. I'm sure a history teacher would back me up, but maybe the degree in which it's taught is not the same. I don't know. It certainly is taught in schools, and I would probably say that it would be, if you were doing, like, let's say you were doing a higher history course, maybe you were doing like 19th century Glasgow, maybe doing World War II or the rise of fascism or something. It's likely that the third element would be something related to sort of racism or colonialism. From my sort of just encouraging students and, like, in kind of an outsider's point of view of it as an English teacher. But it is taught. It's not that it isn't taught. Essentially, is my point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of that. I think it was Claire in the comments who said about just having that sort of anti-racist attitude embedded right throughout the thing is slightly different from having a class or a lesson on it. Just that. I'm sure that is true that it's still taught, because I think sometimes the comments about people who have been at school a long time ago sometimes forget that. We often get that. I often see people say, or they need to, at school when they talk about religion, they should learn about all religions. But I know for a fact that they have been learning about all religions from primary school onwards for quite a while now. So it's one of those things that maybe older people say we should be doing that and actually don't know whether it's been done or not. So I'm glad to have people here that are in the sector. But I wanted to come back and ask you again about, we mentioned earlier about representation, which is an important issue that Hashim brought up and Becky mentioned as well. And if you don't see people like you in the system, if all your teachers are white or something, that's a problem. But it's also, I think, a big problem in terms of class in Scotland. I'll sort of throw a kind of little example in about. I mean, I'm from a very working class, archetypal working class background. I left school at 15, as was the way of things then in the 70s. And I found during a debate about the amount of working class kids that are accepted to Oxford and Cambridge, I found out that the percentage of kids from working class backgrounds that are accepted to Oxford and Cambridge is roughly the same percentage as those who apply. And the problem is as much the fact that working class kids do not expect to go far in education. There's a sort of low level of expectation from some backgrounds that means that there's a low level of achievement. And can we do anything in the education system to sort of eradicate that? If we have kids from different backgrounds expected to get less out of education than others?
That's interesting. I think as well, there's part of that is that, like you say, Jim, like people from working class or lower class backgrounds, they see Oxford and Cambridge as a symbol of a certain thing that doesn't represent them. And so, that same young person with the same grades on paper might feel that they'll get a better vibe, more comfortable in a university like Strathclyde or Caledonian or Glasgow. That's just Glasgow universities, but you know what I mean? Like somewhere that feels, and of course you'll always get those high achievers, and those people that have it in their head that academic study is a place for very specific kinds of study and kinds of learning, and they would more naturally flow to those kind of establishments. But I think I think the Oxford and Cambridge issue in Scotland is perhaps a bit of a moot point, because there's a whole other structural thing happening here which creates that creates those institutions. They're emblematic of something else for us as well. It's not just about the fact that they're a highly academic and kind of elitist institutions. They're also, you know, two of England's most crowning kind of empirical elitist establishments, you know. But then similarly, something like St Andrews up here, like when I first started out in education, I got into St Andrews and I chose not to go there because I had the same feeling as you would for Oxford and Cambridge. So I think, like, in general, with something like that, there has been, like Dougie said about, you know, like Dougie's saying about how we teach within secondary and places where that happens. There is always a massive pull in every higher and further education establishment for working class children, young people or students to come there. The gates are open. So it's just about, why aren't young people taking that opportunity up? And a lot of that is to do with the veneer of elitism that higher academia specifically kind of projects out. I mean, I've witnessed it personally as a higher education working class university educator. Like, I still feel out of place there, you know, and there's personal struggles in that particular kind of framework for learning, even for me now, and I've been there for 10 years. So I think there definitely is something more than just, you know, I think it's to do with more than academia, and you're right, it's to do with class and an analysis of where one's own interests would be best served as well, you know.
Laura, I was going to ask you that about, and is it University of Glasgow you're at, or?
Yeah, it's University of Glasgow.
We've had quite a lot of talk in recent years in Scotland about the attainment gap, and also obviously linked to that is student finance, which is less of a problem in Scotland because we don't have to pay tuition fees, but is obviously still a problem. Other barriers do you see amongst your fellow students for people from different backgrounds to be able to access university education?
I think so. I'd say definitely starting with, well, tuition fees are not an issue if you're a home student, but if you're an international student, tuition fees are over £20,000 a year. And wow. I think, like Becky was saying earlier, I think sometimes this topic gets coded in a layer of individual responsibility and achieving your own goals rather than seeing it as a systemic issue. For example, you know, to use the example of Oxford and Cambridge, just for the privilege of taking a test and see if you could apply, you have to pay £70. Now that adds up over time. So you can clearly see how that might eliminate that as an option for a lot of people. And if you talk about class and how there's an attainment gap, I can see how students will slowly stop trying, but the one person that tries and succeeds is gonna be heralded as the one who made it, making the whole problem into an individual issue rather than an individual issue. And from what I've seen with my friends at university, this shows as well in stuff you wouldn't really expect. For example, some students cannot afford not to work through university, and that can have an impact on your grades or your mental health, and it adds up. There's a privilege to being able to go to university and just go to university and be a full-time student. Some people can't afford that. So I think when we're discussing what universities can do to help, there's a bigger conversation to be had beyond student fees. because that's really the first step. But university is still not accessible to everyone unless we get rid of all those barriers as well.
Yeah, I wanted to bring you in on that as well. You're a secondary school teacher. Do you see that as an issue with students at your school, that some from different backgrounds will struggle to even conceive of the idea of going into academia or going into further education? Or
well, I think that that is kind of the central issue. It's this kind of idea of what the going in from even primary school, what they and their families kind of, well, either they as individuals or maybe them and their families kind of expect for them to get out of education. That's a massive factor in what they think in terms of like what it means to get exam, qualifications and exam results in school, and because like they think, well, what's the point in even trying, because I'm going to go and they're not even considering the option of further education. I'm going to go off and do this, or whatever. But I've got a few different things to say about it. So, just go back to Oxford and Cambridge. I've got kind of sort of interest. Well, I've got like a little personal anecdote, basically, because when I was in school, my year group, there was quite a few people in my year. For some reason, just like a freak year group, there was a few that were kind of doing really well, like looked like they were going to get good exam results. So the school got involved with Oxford and Cambridge to try and encourage some of these kids to apply for Oxford and Cambridge. And so Oxford, or one of the universities, sent somebody up, and they did this kind of little workshop thing. And obviously it's really impressive what they've got to offer and stuff. But one of the sort of Oxford professors asked me, he said, well, what do you think is, if you look at statistically, people from Glasgow basically are massively underrepresented at Oxford, and they seem genuine. He was like, I want to change that. I think this is a good. I want it. There's no reason that should be the case. And I said, well, I think it's probably just because there are a lot of people perceive Oxford and Cambridge as posh, or elitist, but posh. Mm-hmm. And he kind of went like that. That's lots of nonsense. So I thought, yeah, man, but that's the point. But, and it was hard for him to see that. But obviously he was well intentioned at the same time. But the other side of it is that there's lots of it with Oxford and Cambridge and English universities in general. I mean, at the end of the day, you can get a free education, university education in Scotland. The government will fund your education in Scotland, but won't in England. So, do you want to have 4 years in Scotland with no debt, with no debt apart from maybe your loans or your, that kind of debt, or do you want to go like what years at Oxford might be as much as 60 grand? Maybe a bit less than that, but something like that. So, if you're Scottish, like it's kind of, even though. If you probably planned out across time, it would probably be worth it. If you look at like leavers destinations for Oxford and Cambridge and the kind of average salary and stuff like that. But just in terms of if you're like going in and you obviously think I can't afford to be 60 grand in debt, then who's going to choose to go to an English university? So I think that's a big factor, and just in the English university aspect. But that doesn't really address the bigger issue, which is this idea of what an average, I would say probably an average kid in Scotland thinks they can get out of education. They don't think, a lot of them don't think, oh, I can go in and I can work hard and I can study and I'll get all the support I need, and it'll be, if I do this, then I'll be able to get my 5 A's and I'll go and become a doctor, and then it just doesn't even cross their minds. And I think that's a wider cultural issue. As a teacher, it's basically, I think it's almost like the heart of everything you do is kind of getting the motivation to learn, especially teachers. Younger kids are a bit more easy to motivate because they're kind of a bit more open-minded. But when you become a teenager, you're a bit more obsessed with your own little cliques and obviously your social status and stuff. And then this idea that you've got to work hard to go into university, it's not really a part of your major values for a lot of them. And so just motivate them to make them realize like this is actually valuable and worth it, and you could actually do it. But for somebody who's maybe like maybe no one in their families ever went to university. It just doesn't seem like a realistic goal.
Yeah.
At the same time, as Laura was saying, there's a big difference when you're going to university with a bit of a safety net, or you're going and you're going to have to work part-time at the same time. Like, it's not as an easy an option for you. Like, if your parents are helping you pay for it, then it's kind of a no-brainer. Like, go to university, it's going to be fun, and you're going to get so much out of it. But if you're doing the same thing with, I need to work a part-time job as well, it suddenly becomes a massive stress on your life, and there's no guarantee of even success, because can you dedicate enough time to your studies when you got to work? So I think it's a combination of the kind of cultural idea, a class-based cultural idea of like, what can you expect from life, and based on your upbringing and your environment, and also just kind of more of a sort of fiscal element of like, do you actually, is it too big a risk to even consider going?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point, because the finance isn't just whether you get a maintenance grant, you have to pay fees. It is how are you going to eat through those 4 years at university? How are you going to survive? And as you say, if you don't have a safety net, which when I left school, which was a long time ago, all of the safety nets existed. I mean, there was no such thing as there were student fees, but the government just paid them to the university. Nobody knew they existed. They just got paid straight to university. There was grant. Well, I didn't go, so I didn't get it anyway. So but also there was
Sorry, I'm like kidding.
There was grants that were.
Jim, that should be a boomer. That should have been a boomer.
It is, yeah. There was also grants that someone told me recently, if the grants had kept up with the rate of inflation and matched the wages, then the maintenance grant for students, compared to if it was similar to when I left school, would be about $6 or $7 grand a year. And instead it's less than $2 grand, so it's like, and that's for the poorest students, can access like $2 grand or something, which is nothing, it barely, and you also get travel expenses, you got all these sort of things. You could also claim rent benefit. You could also claim benefits during the summer break. You could, all of those things were just normal. And the idea that the people who benefited from that were the very politicians that took it away from the next generation of kids and brought this kind of competition element into it. Now, I think we're going to a wee break to get some of the comments in, and then I'm going to come back with quite an interesting question on the whole finance angle.
Yes.
Mark.
I feel I should have a clipboard. For this bit. Comments coming in. Lots of comments coming in. Lindsay saying, good point, Gordon. I'm concerned that college education is still seen as an option for those who fail to get to uni. Colleges offer some of the best and most student-centred teaching. And I think that was after Gordon had said, I wonder about the implications of considering a working class kid a success only if they attempt to class jump via university.
Yeah.
Aya Matt is saying, if I went to he said something before that makes sense. Okay, so yeah, reverse snobbery is a thing. I was a working class kid in a posh private school, token bursary kid, and it was encouraged to achieve academic excellence, including Oxbridge. If I went to a local school in Maryhill at the time, I wonder if such considerations would have ever been on the table, no matter my abilities. You'd get the shit kicked out of you for even mentioning it. And we've got West Side saying, I'm a primary pupil support assistant. It's generally a temporary term time job, but it's vital in raising attainment and promoting the ACES approach. ACES is how Scotland revolutionises education. And there's a couple more. Lou's saying that one of her son's favourite classes is RE. He loves learning about all the different religions. We're a non-religious family, but I think it's very important to learn about all religions. And H.T. Clare is saying, aside from access to uni, the problem is value. What do we value as a society, and therefore how do we measure success? Is getting to uni the measure? There's some stuff to chew on. I'm off.
I've got nothing else to say about that.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. If you can also, folks, if you keep your comments coming about the President of Scotland, And in an independent Scotland, we at that radio have decided that we're going to get rid of the monarchy and replace them with but we want a president that's a cool president. Like Czech Republic had a playwright, Ukraine had a comedian, and as we said, Britain has Boris Johnson. And so who would be the president in an independent Scotland for you? And we want to see those suggestions coming in as well. So far we've had Grado, and that's it. So we don't want Grado to win. You have to come up with better ideas than that. There it is again. President Grado's winning 2-0 right now. So we can't have that. To come back onto the thing about finance and things like that, this is something that came up in a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago. Now, we all know very, very, very well that the things that have developed over recent years about the idea of better schools. There's better comprehensive schools than other comprehensive schools. So people will buy a house or move to a house in a specific area in order to get to the catchment area of what's considered the better school, which obviously then makes them an even better school, and then obviously attracts better teachers, etc., etc. Everybody wants to work at the best school. So, I mean, has the housing market, the actual housing market, and that's been created in Britain over the last, say, 40 years, the importance of housing, has it actually ended the idea of this equal comprehensive education? Can we have the way that it was? Can we have a secondary school in a poor area and a secondary school in a wealthy area? Can we actually say that they're getting an equal education now, the way things are? Yeah, that'd be a good one for you to come in on, Dougie.
Because I know everyone's got lots to say about this, but I just think I've got just my own personal life experience is relevant, because the school I went to in Kirkintilloch was a classic, I think as far as I'm concerned, it was a classic comprehensive. And basically the reason for that is it was Kirkintilloch is a kind of a mixed type of town. It's got people from different classes, let's say, but it's also next to Lenzie, which is very kind of middle class. And then there's there's a lot of towns outside as well, which kind of vary. Some of them are kind of post-industrial places with quite a lot of deprivation. And being a Catholic school has a wide catchment area, so it kind of brings in people from all sorts of different places. So it was kind of like, I would say, the kind of classic comprehensive. And for me, growing up, it was an absolutely massively positive impact on my life. The fact that I went to a comprehensive school, the fact that there was people from different kind of backgrounds, and you just became friends with people who were from different backgrounds, but you didn't. Well, when you're that young, when you're 12, 13, you obviously don't think, oh yes, I'm going to talk to the working class gentleman over here, and I'm going to talk to the upper middle class chap over there. You don't think about that. You're just friends with people, and then maybe after a few years of doing that, you might have went to a few people's houses and thought, oh, he lives in a house, he lives in a flat, and whatever. But even then, it doesn't really come into your mind. So you kind of just meet people from a broader range, and it just becomes a natural part of your life. And I think that is just, for me, was just such a massive benefit to me. It really helped me to improve my understanding, especially after I'd kind of grown up and reflect back on it when I'm 18, 19 or so on, and thinking about these guys, suddenly realizing the different class element that was involved within my friends, which I didn't care about at the time when I was younger, but starting to understand it a bit better. And then having this understanding of what the society is, because you're from a broader societal friend group, let's say. I think it was an extremely valuable thing for me as a kid to experience. And as you say, now I don't know how long it's been going on for, but certainly for 20, 30 years, you've got this postcode private school thing, really. So although you're going to a state school, it's not a fee-paying private school, but you're paying, extra to go and live in this neighbourhood because it is the Lenzie Academy, Bearsden Academy kind of catchment area. I mean, the only reason I'm mentioning the school names is because I've actually seen houses advertised saying this house is within the Bearsden Academy, catchment area. So it's clearly adding value to that house. And so people are paying extra for that in order to be part of that kind of more, whatever elitist kind of environment. Well, not elitist, but in terms of social class, it's more, it's less like.
And of course, that's reflected in the results, because we measure schools by these league tables and results, and of course, those schools are the ones that are continually getting the best outcomes.
It's a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy. But I think the problem with that is, like, if you think, the best thing, if your only thing you think from your kid is like, I want them just to go to the school which gets them the best grades, it's not really there's so much more to being in a school than that, like being a part of a community, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the massive factor that basically middle class parents are making a mistake, really, in thinking that we need to basically send our kids to a place where the only people other children are going to meet are going to be also middle class. I just think obviously not every kid that goes to school in Bearsden, obviously they're going to it's just something like that. But it's just that if you've never really been, if all your friends are like you, then you just don't really have a good idea of what it's like.
Yeah.
And I think
Becky, I was going to bring you in as a middle class parent. I was
Yes.
I mean, that's something I have seen people that I know with younger kids having these conversations that were totally alien conversations like 2 or 3 decades ago about what school their kid's going to be, where their house is. If they move 3 streets along, they get the better school. Have you heard, I mean, other parents around your age, have you heard this coming up? Is that a thing that parents talk about now?
Well, I mean, being a parent of middle class, I don't like to see myself as middle class, but maybe I've heard that Darren married up, so you know.
It was on the telly saying he was middle class.
Right, he knows what he's up to. Well, you know, there's a social divide even in this house, Jim. So I mean, as a parent of 2 young children, and very interestingly, Dougie, I had a very different experience in a very similar school, although my school, and I won't go into my personal experiences, that's not what it's about, although it has informed a lot of my later teaching methods, I will say. I hope for the better in a lot of ways. But I had a very different experience in school, partly because of my own background, partly because of my gender, but also my vulnerability and little, you know, and my essays scores, you know, and the ways that my life was going at the time. And so in a school that didn't have a lot of funding, took in Ibrox, Govan, you know, like Ross Hall, like Penally, all these different schemes in Glasgow, I didn't have as smooth and community-based experience within the education system. And I don't think a lot of people who were less privileged than me still had a good experience either. There was maybe only about 3 young kids at the time who were black or of a different ethnic background, and you know, and there was, you know, if kids were gay, they weren't coming out, and you know, it was quite a rough place to live, and it was quite a difficult place to navigate. And so like a lot of my understanding of where I want my kids to go is based on that. And it's weird because I don't have the not snobbery, but that idea of they have to go to this school, but they just have to not go to mine. That's like already in my head, you know. So I think that like all parents, it's quite natural for them to have aspirations for their kids, but as well as that, there's the very, very kind of nuanced navigation of social learning. So I came from a background of very stoic people, but I went to a school in a hotbed. So being a stoic person in that kind of environment was difficult to navigate. And so in general, I think you'll know it, okay, like within secondary schools and primary schools at the moment, they have things like Excel groups and, you know, lunch clubs and bits and bobs where they kind of try and scoop up some of the young people that are perhaps falling between the cracks within a much more hostile overall environment for youth than you would get perhaps in a different environment. And I think Matt was saying in the chat about like him being the token kid that went to the better school because of his grades, and I think that's a really hostile environment for someone as well, or it can be. So again, like obviously there's lots of commentary there that's about, you know, class and this idea of where do we move, where do we go, and I think like some of it's probably based on right, for instance, right, I'm going to go off piece slightly, but there's a type of person, right? And it's brilliant. This is an amazing type of person, a very studious academic person. And you'll find them everywhere. No matter what school you go to, they exist. And those young people end up being doctors or teachers or lawyers. And a lot of them go the short way. So some people go the long way around and they have a social education. And some people go the short way around and they have an academic education, and it's mainly fueled by they go to school, they go to uni, they go do whatever they do, and then they become employed. And so I think the parents who are repeating that have a lot less social education, no offence parents that are doing that, than people who perhaps have had a broader life experience. And so and that rings true on the floor of the playground as well. You know, it's the same systemic stuff, you know. So I think I don't judge the parents of you know, upper class parents or parents that want to send their kids to schools like that. I think they come with their own issues later in life, and a lot of the time the standards or the hopes that they have aren't met, and they have, you know, they have to navigate a very different and sometimes often hostile environment at the same time. So I think it's more about what we're teaching and how we're teaching it, which is very much rooted in you know, early intervention and early learning that is going to have the most impact on people enjoying education and no matter what their class, and that then driving them to pursue some sort of further education, be it university, community, college, whatever they do. And again, that comes down to essentially how as a society we brand education as well. Like, you know, there is a kind of even you know, a young person, for instance, going and doing an apprenticeship in hairdressing, finding a real creativity in that and starting a business, that's as valuable for them and their self as a young person who is highly academic, uses the left side of their brain and goes and be a doctor, you know. So yeah, I guess that the whole issue once again is a structural issue, isn't it? And like I say, as a parent of young children and one young child who's about to go to school, I felt those urges to protect my children from the experience I had as a young person. And so I can see where that whole kind of moral kind of ambiguity comes in when it comes to where am I going to send my kids, you know. So I don't think it's really about the parents so much as it is the structures that we're teaching in, essentially. I think that's my speech.
Yeah. Laura, I was going to ask you about that, because one of the things that's come up in a wee back chat here at the side as well about is the value of education, what it's for. So, for instance, this idea that nobody seems to be telling young people that you can go to university just to learn, and that learning in itself is a good thing. I'm getting a lot of feedback here of whistles and bumps. I don't know if it's coming from somewhere else. I'm not really sure where it's coming from. But one of the things I wanted to bring you in as a student activist as well is a few years ago, and which you probably know about, a few years ago under Tony Blair's government, they had this idea that 50% of young people will go to university as a target. You know, to me that kind of said that somehow you weren't achieving if you didn't get to university, and undervalued further education, colleges, apprenticeships, going into the work and all that, and sort of made it a sort of and what we also did around that time that I've sort of noticed is, from a very, very early age, talking to children about how this path through education in primary, then secondary, then university is all about your career, is all about your future, is all about that. It's not learning for the beauty and the sake of learning. It's almost like a client. You're almost like a client receiving a service for which you want a sort of financial outcome at the end. But what I noticed last year, because of COVID, and we had students stuck in halls of residence and various things like that, I think it's gone further than that. And now in education, we see students not as clients, but almost like a commodity that's a tradable commodity. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have so many. I agree 100% with what you're saying. There is a clear path between the point you start primary school to the point you finish university, and that is to create workers. And there's a very defined path you have to follow if you want to succeed in the way they call it. But I think it's going even beyond that and finding that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you go to the schools that get the rich kids, you're probably going to end up in a good university, and that gives you good job prospects once you leave university, which results in you being able to give your own kids that university or that school that will in turn give them more opportunities in the future. I think with COVID, we're starting to see how this system is so wrong in the way it views students. First of all, by undervaluing the value of all the education that does not follow that set path of going to university and ending up in a high-paying job. And I think it specifically highlights how we students have gone from the people to be educated to the people funding the system, and almost like I would say bags of money for universities to take. I've seen, especially at the start of this year, how students were encouraged to, for example, come into the university cities. I was told to come to Glasgow from Spain and find a flat or stay in student halls. That's money that I would be paying to be here, only to be told the moment we got here that everything was going to be online. The university had been planning for everything to be online from the start, didn't tell students. And once they can reap the benefits of all the students coming in, all the enrollment money coming in, then that's when they told us. So it was a very clear message that we were, like you said, clients. We were using a service and we had to use it according to their own guidelines, or if we didn't like it, we could get out. And we complain and we protest and we ask for fees reduction, we ask for rent reduction, and there was no response from the university, mainly because it's a system. You're paying for the privilege of one day getting a high-paying job that will make you pay your loans back and hopefully continue the cycle. So I think there's a relationship between what you said about undervaluing professions that do not go and follow that path, and the whole idea of seeing students as clients, because they want us to pay to keep the system going. And that's really terrible, because in this case it was not only at the cost of our future prospects and having to pay for the world's most expensive streaming service that is online. We're also gambling with our health for the sake of profit. We saw disproportionate rates of COVID infections in student halls, and that was purely for money, because students could not leave those halls, and they were ready to come there by the university for profit. So I think in this case, when we talk about how universities frame education, I think the answer is very clear. They first see us as an investment for money, and they speculate with that money, but they also only see us as their clients. They don't see any value in the education they're providing us beyond the skilled labor we can provide later on.
That delay.
Yeah. Catch up.
I love that delay.
Yeah, I think in general we have this situation throughout education, from primary through secondary into university, where we are seeing this path, and we're not having this idea that that education for education's sake. I think there might be a wee bit of a delay here. You might be getting this a wee bit later, and that's something we'll maybe then talk about, is education for education's sake, learning for the sake of learning, which is a good thing for everybody. Do we have any good ideas of how we go about doing that? How do we make education better?
Well, there's actually there's been a couple of ideas. Yeah, there's a couple of comments that are actually on that. Danny's saying that it's sad that Glasgow never corrected crowded schools after closing too many. A school in Govanhill had 5 primary 1 classes when I lived there. And Gordon's saying eradicate uniforms. Which is an interesting one, because I always remember, when I was at school, I always thought that as well, and then I remember my dad saying, but then what you might have is people with families with more income would maybe have better clothing and stuff like that. So I don't actually know how I feel about that. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I think it's the really stupid things like blazers and stuff. I remember when I was in school, I went to Lourdes. I don't even care, I'll shout them out. Lourdes, I went there, sort it out. But I would get sent home from wearing a denim jacket. You know what I mean? It's like, a denim jacket. I think if you're wearing the khaki and the shirt, there's a sense of uniformity. I think some things are important, and then some things become almost like a matter of pettiness, and it just kind of adds to an issue for young people who are trying to perhaps, show their individuality or assert a sense of identity within a very difficult to navigate situation. But then at the same time, the good thing about uniforms is young people who come from backgrounds that have more disadvantages aren't being shown up for what they don't have. And that doesn't come into the conversation. So there's a balance there, definitely. But stupid is like sending kids home for denim jackets and yo-yos and,
I suppose you're still going to have that. I suppose with even like trainers, you're still going to wear your shoes, so you're always going to have that thing going. I got suspended for school for refusing to take my jacket off because I said it was cold, and I got suspended for that.
My
Becky,
twin
well,
brother and I we walked into the primary 5 playground, right? I've got a twin, Daniel. And it was like, we weren't Jake balls or nothing, but my mum just didn't believe in labels, right? And we walked into the primary 5 playground, this is the school reality, with a pair of Nike trainers on each, and we got a clap from the school. A clap for having these trainers. And I remember being mortified, do you know what I mean? And at the same time, feeling finally accepted.
Oh, wow.
Getting a pair of Reebok trainers for your Christmas. Been there. 2 stripes. It's got to be 3 stripes, not 4 stripes, not 2 stripes. It's got to be 3 stripes.
So you're out.
or my life is over, was the feeling back then. And now, obviously, I don't care. But Gordon saying the argument that a kid from poverty feel embarrassed to wear cheaper clothes without uniform feeds into the notion that having money makes you better. Well, that's correct, I suppose, because what we are saying here is that it's a structural issue that we need to change overall the entire system. So, just
but I don't think the structural issue starting with that is the right way to go about that, because like you say, Gordon, that's totally true, and in a perfect society, great point, but we live in a society where we are material and measure things materially, and people's kids taunt other people's kids for those kind of things. So it's definitely true, Gordon, but also not the
big up Lou for the Knicks gutties. I had a pair of them as well, and I remember my dad trying to explain to me that Knicks gutties are better because he can buy like 7 pairs of trainers a year rather than 2, and people with fancy trainers have got smelly feet. That was his take on it. We've got go Laura, says Julia.
She's one of my friends.
Angela saying children learn at different levels at different times. It's unfair to push kids to try force them to fit into a curriculum that they could struggle with or don't understand. There's a really good documentary about that. I'll try and find it before the end of the show. And it's just talking about, that this system that we're in just now with education, it was kind of designed for the beginning of the industrial era, and it's just no longer fit for purpose. I think West Side is tuned in as well. I think it was him that was talking to me about maybe speaking to some of his pupils about like doing a YouTube channel and stuff, and that's like something that older people would rule out. Is like, what a stupid idea, you'll never make money from that. But the thing is that it is actually, it's a very tough career path to make money from, but at the same time it's just as likely or more likely than being successful doing a YouTube channel than you would say being a musician at this stage. So there is less and less opportunities in the way that we used to recognise them. So we've got to move with the times and embrace digital stuff as well. We've got a comment coming in from the president game is President Trump He's like 0.5% Scottish.
Sit down, Matt.
Sit down, Matt. Presidenta Impressi has the name and the best message. Love wins.
Oh, good idea.
Alan
like
saying
that.
First Minister Becky Wallace. President Wallace says Jam as well. Danny's saying Becky Wallace co-president with Hugh Reid. So Becky's now beating Grado.
That would be a nightmare.
We've got
The
President
hijinks
Janie
we'd
Godley.
get up to, Jim.
Would love to see her at the GA
aye.
smacking them all about. President McCoist, I'm not a Rangers supporter, but he is a national treasure. And when is being happy a suitable career choice for growing up? Not once did anyone, ever say, have that as an option. What would make you happy? Because I mean that's
that's the number.
Because how many of these big well-paid jobs do people get groomed for, and they get all their qualifications, and they get the big job, and they spend their entire life working 100 hours a week under complete stress, and then die young because they never get to enjoy the success that they've actually had. So yeah, I think that's just
so
a
many,
very important point.
and there's a massive ratio. I don't know it off by heart, but having an old lawyer friend, there's a massive ratio in the first few years of schools like law school and med school of dropouts because of the stress of that particular career path. So definitely, man, it's we're building people up to put them in hyper stress environments that just aren't good for them. It's horrible.
Lucy,
Yeah, that's just terrible.
Most kids learn better through fun, role play. My kid is additional.
Okay, right. Let's try and bring it back to the
rude. Jim, that's rude.
Delay.
I know you've got a delay, but that came across as a bit rude. But what I'll do is I'll just nip off. I know when I'm not wanted. I'll let you get.
The delay does. I don't know if you're still getting a delay now that Mark's not there. Is it only when he's there? You're still getting it. How long?
Yeah, I think we might still be getting it.
I think it's
How long is this delay?
A 15-second delay, Jim.
Can you hear me at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
No, you can't hear me. Okay. Maybe Mark can use some more comments, and I'll come back in.
Jim, everyone can hear you. You're just a bit of a delay. It's just a bit of a delay going on. That's all it is. Yeah. So what Lou was talking about there was, about different ways of learning as well, because that's a really important thing that we've not really talked about. Is that everybody's got different ways of learning and different things that they're interested in. People react. Some people are better at learning in the morning. Some people are morning people. Some people like myself take a couple of hours to load up. And it just seems very strange that we're making people do subjects that they've maybe got absolutely no interest in. They've got to do it when they could be working on something that they're very good at and getting really good at it as well. What do you think about that, Laura?
Well, I think for most people, there's this balance between something that you like and something that will help you in the future. And I don't think that's fair. I mean, I think the way society works right now is that you have to work and go to university to get to a point where you can make a lot of money, for example. But I don't agree with the way we value things that way. I think being happy, like it was said in the comments, should be a career option. We should all definitely be aiming for that. But sadly, that's not possible. And like Becky was saying, we end up having people who accept these terrible conditions of stress. It completely destroys social life, even your family life, for the sake of money, of profit. And I think people, when they choose these careers, they like the things money can buy. But if we didn't live in a society that made that possible in the first place for these careers to have such high salaries under these terrible conditions, I don't think anyone would choose those careers. I think we would all go for something that truly makes us feel fulfilled at the end of the day. And those things don't have to be things that require university education. Some people, like it was said before, would be happy being a hairdresser, and that should be a totally valid and respected career option, just as being a lawyer. It's just that because certain careers, come with that tag of higher profit for you, they're more respected. But I think that's terrible.
I wonder if universal basic income or something like that
Oh my
might
God, I
actually
was
turn
just
that on
going to
its
say
head.
that.
Like, because basically, if we can all eat food, pay our rent, and we didn't need to worry about how to live, the basic needs were met, then you would get a lot more people maybe getting into more creative pursuits.
Yeah.
You would get people coming out with new, like maybe riskier, forward-thinking businesses that might make the world a more environmentally or friendly place as well. Becky, I think you've got something to say on that.
I'm desperate. I'm bursting at the seams. But that's what learning is, Mark, and that's the interesting thing about what has become the institution of learning. So there's 2 points here. One, in fact, three. Firstly, yes, universal basic income would promote creativity, and creativity doesn't just mean writing a wee song, painting a wee picture. Creativity is about how we formulate our ideas, how we expand our thought processes to a point where we create hypotheses, where we encourage new modes of learning. That can only happen with the freedom to be creative. And the irony of the education system is this, right? You go through primary 1 to primary 7 being taught a standardised curriculum, even within the new framework for the Curriculum for Excellence, right, which is meant to be progressive, but there's a lot of problems with it which make it not progressive. Most of that's to do with funding and the resources. Then you go through secondary school with a similarly standardised curriculum, and you get put into little boxes, right? Then those little boxes go off to university or college, which they might do, where they're taught a similarly standardised curriculum all the way up to 4th year. Then they get a wee chance to do a bit of independent research in 4th year, but it's totally umbrellaed under the weight of this standardised curriculum and degree that they've been working towards. Then you get to master's level and suddenly you're imbued with freedom that you've never had before to create and play. And then after that, you can do what the fuck you like, right? So then you get to a point where you've punished yourself enough to then be allowed the personal space and freedom to let your mind play and create. And the problem, and that's your PhD, your master's, all that stuff. But the problem with that is, to get to that place, firstly, your mind has to be moulded and shaped into this structural understanding, this societal understanding, and it's so damaging. And so the beauty of education, the beauty of it happens way too far in the future for a lot of young people or adults or anyone that's interfacing with education. I was watching this documentary the other day, and it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? And I know he's a bit of a kind of celeb astrophysicist and all that, but he said a really interesting thing, and he was just basically like, when kids leave the school, they throw their books up in the air. The last day of school, they throw their books up in the air and they go, yeah, school's out, thank fuck. They rip up all their papers and they run a mile, right? Something is fundamentally wrong with the education system if that's how young people feel about learning. Because learning should be about this beautiful journey of understanding your environment, understanding your world, and understanding how you perceive it through the lens of your culture or whatever, And so, I can't remember what my point was, but it's something about that. Universal basic income would allow us space to be creative like that, and it just doesn't exist. It would be a great thing to have.
Gordon saying cap wages while we're at it. Well, you definitely, if you're going to have universal basic income, you'd need to cap rent prices in some way so that you wouldn't just have a situation whereby landlords could just increase the amount that they're charging on their flats. So that would definitely be a thing. Jam saying then you'd have no nurses and carers and things, though. What would you say to that?
What do you mean with universal basic income?
Well, universal basic income, you wouldn't.
But I don't think that's true, because I think people have, there's a whole spectrum of different people and personalities. And the first thing that would happen is the low paid jobs, you would have to pay more for them, because they're still necessities. We've proven that through COVID, that during this time it's been quite clear who the key workers actually are that we need every day, and a lot of them are low paid or classed as low skilled, but they would have to be paid more under that framework. And I know that scares people, because they think, well, where's all the money coming from? But people would actually be getting paid out less across the board in terms of benefits and stuff like that in that system. And the high, like, human nature is to, you know, a lot of, like, personally, I'm a nurturer. Even if I had £1 million in the bank, I would still want to teach. I would still want to do those things. So I think, like, there are people that would take more joy in the work. They would enjoy their work more because they would be paid more. You would hope, right? The other side of the spectrum, that's a good point. What do we do about the massive capitalist society we live in and the fact that some people are earning billions and billions of pounds? Need to speak to an economist about that because I don't know.
What do you think, Laura? UBI?
Oh, well, I think, like Becky was saying, there are certain types of people that would be happy to do certain types of jobs if they didn't have the pressure of making ends meet, if they weren't basically being held hostage by trying to meet their basic needs. I think when you talk about rent, when you talk about food, and you talk about utilities, all those things, if they were covered for, people will be free to explore their actual interests. And that doesn't need to mean all the professions related to care would suddenly go empty. There are people who are genuinely interested in covering those positions. And like on the other side of the spectrum, we'd have all of these positions that are paid millions a month for, like we have seen during COVID, service that doesn't actually benefit society. Like, what does a consultant do to benefit society if you think about it, and look at the wages they're getting? So I think if we have this conversation about meeting people's basic needs and giving them the freedom to explore what they actually want to do in their lives without the pressure of making ends meet, you'd actually have a much better society that might even report much more progress, because currently the only people who are free to advance society and contribute to progress are the people who can meet their needs first. So for example, you only get, say, 10% of people thinking, how can we make society better? Whereas if everyone was free to do that, it's not only that we'd be more creative, we'd actually be creating much better society, because everyone would be free to come up with ideas to make society better, even technologically speaking. So I think, first of all, people would actually be interested in, you know, taking care of each other, because I think that's in our nature. And we'd end the shame around those jobs that people don't want to do. I mean, what part of those jobs being undesirable actually comes from being paid terribly? Say, if we increase the pay for those jobs, do they still remain that undesirable? Because I think for some of them, the reason why they're seen as the jobs no one wants to do is because it's terrible working conditions and terrible pay. So I think that would definitely change things as well.
Exactly. Also things like the disgraceful 0-hour contracts and stuff that people are put on. And yeah, what I would say to that is, well, is that, I mean, the carers are paid so badly just now anyway, that majority of the people that are doing that job are doing it because they want to help people, and that's why they've got into it. And I'm sure that would still be the case. UBI would create more carers and nurses. People want to care and help their fellow human. The reason they can't is because of the necessity to work to live. Key workers get paid proper. More people can care for their own kids, their own grands, partners who are off sick. If they have UBI, then they don't need to run off to work, which once again would be a less pressure on the system, because people are having to work to pay the bills, and then the system, and also people's general health. I mean, the hospital costs and stuff that as well that would go down. So I'm fully in for UBI. Angela's saying my son was left behind and dropped out of school because he had autism. I'm also a single parent, wasn't listened to and didn't get any support. He's a very clever boy with a beautiful soul. Well, that's it. I mean, I left school very, very early. I left school before the end of fourth year. And yeah, well, I mean, I suppose maybe I'm not the best example, but I'm sure there is lots of people who did leave school very early and are doing very well for themselves. And Lena saying, us as young people need to experience more instead of being obligated to grow up to fit the standards and be able to just afford to live. Exactly, because you've been forced to sort of live a world that is no longer relevant. As Jim was mentioning earlier on, it was a totally different game. You could house prices were ridiculously low. The prices, fuel costs were really low, living costs were really low, and people got free education. And it's the people who are in charge now that had all those benefits that are now taking those things away. Alan saying UBI would be a step in the right direction. I mean, this is basically what happened. We've been told when, you know, even Corbyn's manifesto was laughed at. It was a magic money tree, and then when COVID hit, basically all this money appeared, and people that were middle class were suddenly furloughed, and this money was found from somewhere. And the only reason that it wasn't universal basic income would have saved an awful lot of money if everyone just got a universal basic income. It probably would have meant more people would have stayed at home rather than walking about the streets sick and going to work sick and passing on the virus. But the reason that they didn't want to do that is because if people had seen how well universal basic income was working, people wouldn't have wanted to give it up. They would have been wanting to say, actually, we quite like that and we want to keep it.
It's representative of a fundamental lack of basic forward planning as well, and I think that speaks to the kind of almost bubblegum nature of our politics. Do you know what I mean? It's like the important thing is to get the quick fix. That's something that our society suffers from across the board. You know, like the important thing is to get the quick fix, and in order to do that you need to stick with, you know, whatever the populist idea is, or whatever, you know, whatever is either most extreme or can get the most clicks or gets the most likes or can sound intense or exciting or popular. But it's those long-term solutions, and that's something that maybe as an independent Scotland we could start to discuss. Although I reckon if we are going to discuss it, we need to start planning it, like now, kind of like stuff like this, because it is a long-term solution. And societies across the world that have integrated different aspects of the conversations that we've had today have had great success with the overall morale of their people. And I think, like Laura was saying, what is the point of bringing people up to live an unattainable, unaffordable existence unhappily? It doesn't make sense. Like, and it was not going to move us forward as a communal society either. You know, it's just going to over the next 50 to 100 years or so, just create a wider ravine, as Darren would say, between the two sides.
And it would probably help. It would probably help disrupt the whole racist stuff that seems to be coming back just now as well, because people are worried about refugees stealing their jobs because they're living in schemes where there is no employment opportunities. But as we all know, it's not the refugees that's stealing the jobs, it's the computers and the robots that are taking the jobs. And that's going to continue, so we need to be thinking out the box about how to create new sustainable jobs. And I would imagine that would hopefully tie in with some environmental stuff, some mental health stuff. And there's a lot. This world is in a it's a mess. As COVID's proven how much of a mess the system is, I think everyone can see it with their own eyes. So we do need to be thinking differently. And Jim Monaghan is back. Jim, good to see you, mate. Give him a few seconds, but he's back.
Maybe back. I don't know.
You're back.
I might not be.
You're back.
I might not be. I've no idea what's happening. It's only StreamYard. Yeah.
Don't blame it in StreamYard.
I think. Yeah. I think what the bit I missed seems to be the question that I was going to ask anyway, which was how do we create an education system that makes people enjoy it and it makes people happy, so that at the end of your school, whether you're going to university, whether you've passed exams or whether you're not going to university or whatever, you've enjoyed your school experience and got something out of it. And I think that's what you've been talking about when I was out anyway, I think.
Well, a wee bit, but I'll let Laura take over from that. What Jim just said.
I think that's a very good question. I think if you want to create an education system that genuinely provides an experience you can enjoy, you not only need to change the education system, you need to change the whole society as a whole. Because you can be attending a class you really enjoy and you get a lot out of that class, but if you know that the moment you step out of that class you're gonna be in debt, or you're not gonna have a job, or you're not gonna be able to pay rent, then the whole experience is spoiled for you. I think if we try and create an education system that truly cares about making people feel fulfilled, we need to change the entire system. Basically, we're gonna have to get rid of this whole idea of people trying to struggle to exist and make ends meet. I think when we remove that pressure from society and people are free to exist without having to pay, for simply existing, then you can start thinking about an education system that truly nurtures people. But I think a step in the right direction would be the conversations we were having about schools being the equalizers. So public funding going towards schools and trying to get rid of all these loopholes that people find to get more out of the system and cheat and advance. And I think if we, first of all, we had more funding. I don't know if I'm got it, but
I think Jim just said revolution. I think
yeah.
Revolution. I think he said.
He says that every few hours. Just.
I'm over that. I mean, I think it's late, but we definitely should be working towards it. I can't wait. But like I was saying, I think with revolution, if we're going for that angle, which I'm totally for, we can get rid of this whole structure that makes people struggle when they're in university years.
That's what Laura was saying that.
Sorry, Jim? Oh yeah, there's a bit of a delay going on. Jim, you are endearing, says Julia. We've got UBI would allow more time to get more involved in permaculture and learn to grow food at home or in allotments. Another great idea. UBI would open many creative opportunities.
I said yes, I agreed with that. And I don't want to be coming in and repeating things that's already been said, but I was going to
Right, we've got this, Jim.
Oh god, the delay is just too funny.
It's so funny. Right, well, can I quickly chime in? Right, I agree with everything Laura said.
Yeah, just carry on without me, it's okay.
I'm sorry, Jim.
That's so time.
I think like what I've like really been thinking about a lot, and it seems clearer to me, and the more I work with young people so I work a lot in community education, even though I lecture. The rest of the time I'm working in like things like young offenders institutions and in community settings. A lot of the time I work with young men ready for work groups, stuff like that. But for me, like what I think needs to change is we need to treat creativity with the same reverence as we do logic. So like one side of the brain or one side of the learning experience is very much catered for in the standard curriculum, and that will always have a place in the curriculum. So I mean there's definitely room for us to learn maths and and sciences that they're important, and we need mathematicians, we need scientists, but I think we need to view creativity with the same kind of balance. And so we have to say, well, how can we, here's a logical explanation for this, or here's a lens to look through this where we can quantify it, but here's a lens to look through this where we're using creative understanding, cultural understanding, social understanding, where we're discussing it through these different lenses. That feeds into the very, very early conversation we were having about, structural racism and stuff like that. It's all part of, we don't really teach the world through a cultural lens and a creative lens in that sense within the school environment. And the sooner we give the arts and creativity in general as much reverence and as much of a balance, then all those things that fall under creativity, which are mechanics, hairdressing, makeup artistry, creating a YouTube video, all these very practical, interesting and creative forms of knowledge, if we can imbue them with the same importance as we do standardised curriculum, then we'll be able to create a society where young people feel valued because of the things that they care about and within the classroom environment. And I think a lot of that comes down to how do we integrate education into the broader society. So some things perhaps can't be taught in the classroom, so let them be taught in a community centre, let them be valued or even marked within a different, if a young person goes to an AMDRAM group but they don't say a word in school, let that be part of their curriculum education. If a young person goes and helps their dad, and that's a pure sexist thing I was going to say, there goes and helps their dad in the garage every weekend, but maybe then let that be part of their education. Like, start to quantify the learning experiences that happen out with the classroom as part of the curriculum, such as the progressive policy that is the curriculum for excellence, but it isn't utilised within that kind of structure within school because there's no time, there's no space. So I think like just broadening what we assume is education for young people. You know, there are some people out there who are natural carers, like we were just talking about. There are some people out there who are probably natural politicians. There's probably some people out there who are natural artists. And if we can harness and kind of bespoke education for young people in that sense, then we can allow young people to play and enjoy education. And if they're natural mathematicians, fucking brilliant. And if they're a natural scientist, excellent. But, you know, we shouldn't, I don't think we should force feed standardised curriculum as it stands right now down the throats of every child. I think we need to look at the education system and go, okay, well, what's here? What do we enjoy? What is this child passionate about? What is making this child click? I'm going to shut up, I promise. But another thing that needs to be fixed within very early education is how we deal as educators with language when it's brought to the table. So there's a classism in education about language, and from a very young age, a young person who doesn't know any better gets told in the classroom, you're not speaking properly, don't say that word. My rule as an educator is swear all you like, just don't swear at me. Right? If that's part of your language, use it, you know. And it sounds like such a tiny little thing, but in a society that has got so many colours, colloquialisms, like different kind of dialects, to standardise the way people communicate is like one of the fundamental issues we have, I think, in education, to be honest.
It's a good point about the way that people interact, because you know the difference between school or like a good teacher or a good college lecturer is that you'll talk to that person the way that you talk to your friend or anyone else. So why should you have to change it as if you're on BBC Radio 1 and cut out certain words and stuff like that? So I think that's a good point. Also, the standardised curriculum thing you were mentioning there, Becky, I mean, we talked a wee bit about YouTube videos or podcasts and stuff like that that's kind of laughed at as a potential opportunity just now. I remember as well, like, you'll probably see this quite a lot doing the music side of things. I don't know how much you get into the music business side of your what you teach, but that is very outdated. I remember 10 years ago doing a course, and it was like MySpace was already dead, and it's saying that it was talking about the importance of MySpace. In order to pass the test, you had to talk about MySpace, even though that the young people who were actually active within the scene were well aware that MySpace was already gone. So it takes a while for things to catch up. The internet's moving knowledge so fast that the education system doesn't seem to be able to adapt quick enough. Yeah,
it's because, like, and I need to be really careful here, but it's because a lot of in order to teach things like that they are very much a product of youth culture in society, you have to actually actively participate in it as you go. And like, and there's no cut-off point for that. It shouldn't be like, oh, you can't be 70 and teach pop music. You can, as long as you are interacting with the culture as it is now, and not, you know, preaching about a canon that hasn't existed in 50 years. And so, like, and I think that's the same with digital, how we digitally apply cultural things, cultural artifacts and texts. We need to, like, and I don't always know the answer, so that I think as teachers as well, like, you have to be learning all the time, be part of, you know, what you preach, integrate yourself into whatever you're teaching and live it and understand it more, and be ready to totally change up when it changes, you know. So I think, especially in arts and education that's more based in practice-based education, I think people that call themselves, I don't really call myself an educator, and I don't think a lot of people in arts education do. It's more like a facilitator. Like, I think that it's very much on the facilitators and the participants to have that conversation and be learning together. There's stuff that I can teach young people, and there's a lot of stuff they can teach me. And I constantly see that happening in art. So that's a problem, Mark, and that's because the secondary standardised education, you've put a time stamp on it. Do you know what I mean?
And obviously they've got to, I mean, to be fair, it's got to go through a rigorous process before it can be part of the curriculum. So, but things are moving too fast to wait 5 years to be rubber stamped by someone who doesn't understand it. I don't need to be careful what I say. So I think it's just a bit outdated, some certain things.
It's like
and it just kind of shows. It's just
tech and music. You should never be like, got me hoping you'll page me right now. Because like.
What we're going to do, look, Laura, if you've got any closing points you'd like to make, or if you'd like to talk about any of the projects you're involved in, and then hopefully what will happen is Jim will come back, there'll be a 20-second delay, and he can wrap it up.
Okay, well, actually, yeah, I think it ties in with what we were discussing when we were mentioning how the curriculum is standardized. I think there have been really insistent attempts to actually control what can be taught in schools. I'm thinking, for example, of how in England now it is illegal to include anti-capitalist points in school book. So you are definitely trying to control what students are learning here. And I think there's a big threat to education right there, which is part of the things we're discussing on what you can do right now, and that is oppose all these laws that go against our right to know the truth, know the full story, and complain if we don't on the topic of that. I'm pretty sure you've seen the bill that wants to pass that will limit the right to protest, and that's yet another attack on our right to be able to express ourselves and try to fight for a future where we can have our say. So I wanted to quickly shout out to an action that's happening on Saturday. It will be at 1 p.m. in George Square, and it's around the National Day of Action for Kill the Bill. I know this bill doesn't apply in Scotland, but I think it's a very dangerous precedent, especially when we're talking about education and students and the involvement of students in climate strikes, and especially with COP26 coming up in November. It's very important that we show solidarity and we send a strong message that we don't like this type of policing, and we will not let this pass in Scotland if it's ever a question. And then, well, finally, just to wrap it up with what we're discussing, this bill also criminalizes Roma, Gypsy, and traveler communities. So if we're going to push for an anti-racist education, we have to be consistent and show up for these things as well, because if it's illegal to show support for these causes, how are we going to translate that into the curriculum and teach the next generation? So yeah, I just wanted to raise awareness of this, and I hope everyone who can might make it to George Square on Saturday at 1 p.m. Thank you.
It's very important. It's maybe one of the most important bills to oppose, because it pretty much puts in jeopardy being able to protest anything, and there's a lot to protest. It always feels like there's one step forward and then it's 3 steps back. It's almost like it's a deliberate way of nothing ever changing. Jim's back. So we're just going to wait for 20 seconds and then Jim can wrap up on his final thoughts.
It's coming.
Probably not. If you can hear me, can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you.
No, I have to give up, Mark. It's. I don't know what it is. I'm connecting to every other site, but just not. Yeah. You're saying yes, but that was like ages ago. That was ages ago. I asked that question.
Thank you very much to our guest tonight. Thank you to Laura.
I'm going to have to.
Thank you to Becky. Thank you to Jim Monahan. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have a wee round of applause.
What a legend, Jim Monahan.
For Jim. Round of applause for Jim. Thank you to Hashim. Thank you to Doogie, who was on the show earlier on as well. A great point, says Laura, says Angela. Alan saying the internet has been a blessing and a curse. Social media has been used to spread disinformation at times, amongst other things. People ask Google or use Wikipedia, which helps, but the effort is gone. Absolutely. Outstayed cause of your Glasgow slang. talking about what Becky was mentioning there, absolutely. Lewis, in this past year of homeschooling, I focused on my son's weaknesses and had to navigate my way around the best way to teach him to strengthen that. I found games and fun are the best way for him. Absolutely. I think a kid's natural instinct, if they know that it's they're being schooled, then they're obviously going to reject it. Reject authority as well. I mean, just it's quite natural for kids to reject authority. I know it certainly was for me. And you know, yeah, I think everyone's made some really good points tonight. Thank you to you all. We'll be back next week. I believe You Call That Politics is back next week for representation. I believe Jim will confirm that on a Facebook post or maybe on YouTube just now. But I think it's representation next week. And we're taking a day off tomorrow. You Call That Radio, because we are filming a secret thing that I'm very excited about. So there's going to be some amazing stuff coming next week from that filming. We will be back on Wednesday for the Captain Hot Knives open mic night. Thank you to everyone who supports us on patreon.com/You Call That Radio. If you want to see more about our events, our live streams, our podcast, or our web, or our blogs or anything, go to youcallthat.com. And thank you very much. Becky, have you got anything to plug while we're here?
What have I got to plug? If it's to do with education?
No, well, it doesn't need to do with education. Just, I'm sure you've got...
I've got hundreds of stuff. Just put my name into Google, you know, but watch out, don't quote it, because that won't be an academic reference. But put my name into Google, there's hundreds of stuff. Tunes and songwriting retreats and, you know, stuff and things. Sorry, I'm not here as an artist tonight, so...
Okay, yeah, and Becky Wallace has also been nominated as the new president of Scotland, which Jim Monaghan told me was actually the wrong answer. It was Jessie Ray. Jessie Ray is going to be the new president of Scotland, apparently.
Oh, thanks, Jim.
And he's just confirmed that representation. I think you can you can go on the VP ticket. Representation in politics with Elaine Gallagher and Rosa Sally, and there's going to be more to be announced for that. That's next Thursday at 7:00. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Becky. This has been You Call That Radio TV. We'll see you very soon. If you've enjoyed tonight's show, there's about 270 shows we've done since lockdown began last March, so you can just hit the subscribe button on YouTube, or you can just have a wee look through it, and we'll see you very soon. All the best. Bye.
You Call That Radio. You Call That Radio.
What about the people who hated on me?
Right, and then I see the disinfectant that knocks it out in a minute.
That's mad, isn't it?
Is this a Netflix thing?
It's actually a podcast.
What the fuck's a podcast?
You know, it's kind of like a radio show.
Oh, that radio!
Yeah.
And is there a way you can do something like that?
I couldn't help it.
By injection inside.
Yeah, no respect in the respect to the man like Mark. They love what the man talk on the radio. In case you never know. You call that radio, call that the radio. You call that radio, call that the radio. Come and say, in my name, I'll just go with the flow. In my name, I'll just go with the flow. So till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. Till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. Boom. Lot of mercy. Yo. You call that radio. You call that radio. Come and say, don't you be a nether man, I'll go lose your head. Say, don't you be a nether, me say, and lose the head. Me say, radio. Call that a radio. Straight from outer Glasgow. Straight from outer Glasgow, nice enough for the studio. Come and say, in my name, I'll just go with the flow. In my name, I'll just go with the flow. Till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. Till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. No radio. You call that the radio. Them man I give you miss a lot of subject, and them I think a man you can't object. So don't you ever come and disrespect. I love and respect in a every aspect.